There are plenty of so-called hacks out there for living longer, but most of them don't have any sound scientific basis behind them. There is one, however, that clearly shows positive benefits for longevity, and in this episode we're going to explore it, how it works, and why it's such a crucial thing for you to do. Hey, and welcome to Vegetarian Health and Longevity, the podcast where we cover amazing topics that help vegetarians live longer in better health. I'm your host, James LeBague, and I get to interview expert guests and also share my own experiences working as a sports nutritionist and as an advanced clinical practitioner in family medicine. Today's episode is all about resistance training, or strength training. By this, I mean exercise where you are putting your body, and so your muscles, tendons, ligaments and bones, under tension and then moving against that resistance. This might be as simple as yoga poses, all the way up to heavy lifting in the gym. Whatever it is, it's incredibly beneficial. However, there are benefits to certain types of strength training, and we'll delve into that in this episode. I'm also going to tie the principles that we talk about to the vegetarian diet, because what you eat can also significantly influence the positive benefits of resistance training. One of the most important things as we age is staying independent and functional. Whether that's simply climbing the stairs or playing with your kids or grandkids, staying mobile is crucial. To be able to do that, you need muscle. And no, I'm not talking about bodybuilder style muscle. I'm talking about simple functional muscle that helps you move around. When we age, we lose muscle, and this is called sarcopenia, and it's inevitable. So what we want to do is slow that down and minimize the loss. Resistance training helps with this, and the research very clearly demonstrates it. There was a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, and this is pretty much the gold standard way of assessing evidence and assessing the outcomes from it. It was by Chen and colleagues in 2021, and it showed that resistance training was a safe and useful way of improving strength, muscle performance, and lean body mass in older adults. So if you want to stay independent as you get older, then resistance training is a wonderful way of doing this. But as well as muscle being helpful for movement, it also helps with weight management as we get older. Muscle is a more energy-hungry tissue than fat, which means that your base metabolic rate will be higher if you have more lean muscle tissue compared to a higher amount of fat mass. You may have heard that people have a lower metabolism as we get older, and in the most part, that's actually due to lower muscle mass as we age. Now, that is in part due to sarcopenia, like I mentioned, but actually, we know that a significant contributor is that people move less and they do less in the way of exercise or resistance training. So actually, by doing resistance training and keeping that extra muscle, it reduces the risk of you putting on weight as you get older. And as increased weight, and I'm talking about obesity here, is linked with heaps of diseases like an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and of cancer, it's sensible to try to avoid that. Now, when it comes to resistance training, typically what I suggest is something called progressive overload. This means that you are incrementally increasing something in the exercise that you are doing. So for example, that might mean doing more repetitions, more sets, or a heavier weight week on week, and then you build this up over time. Now, it's important to say, don't increase things too quickly. If you think that longevity is the aim here, what we're hoping for is consistency, and that means no injury. Typically, what happens if someone tries to ramp up things too quickly, they try to increase things in every resistance training session that they're doing, they'll get injured or they will just burn out and frazzle, which means they won't stick to their plan over the long term. One of the ways to do this is to take a 3-to-1 ratio, which means over 3 weeks, you follow this progressive overload pattern, and then you have a rest or deload week. This is a very common way of doing it, and it might work perfectly for you, but if it doesn't, don't worry. Everyone is different, and especially if you're a beginner, this is typically too much, so you might consider something like a 2-to-1 ratio instead. Now, when you're doing resistance training, you want to make the adaptations which are beneficial, so increasing or maintaining the amount of muscle that you have. And to do that, you need to combine it with a well-planned diet. As a vegetarian, it can be slightly harder to get protein in your diet. So you want to make sure that all of your main meals include a good source of protein. Some great protein sources for vegetarians include legumes, tofu, tempeh, whole grain carbohydrates, and low-fat dairy. Good amounts of muscle go hand in hand with good amounts of protein, so it's worth getting this right. Now, there's a fascinating thing that happens with heavy resistance training. When you load your bones, they notice this, and they work on clearing out old bone tissue and adding new healthy bone tissue instead. So, for example, when you squat, this affects your hips and your spine, and the end result is that your body wants to strengthen those areas so that if it's faced with it again in the future, it's going to be able to deal with it better. This stimulation of your bones and your joints is fantastic to prevent that gradual decline with aging. Now, as we get older, typically our bone density decreases, but by doing heavy resistance training, you can actually prevent that gradual decline happening. So whilst doing some lighter resistance training is definitely beneficial, if possible, I always encourage someone to do heavy lifting as well. Now, this might seem a bit alien for some people, especially if they've never done it before, but it's so beneficial. If you're already comfortable doing this, then that's awesome, and I would encourage you to build it into your routine. But if you're not comfortable, then it might be worth seeing if you can get a local personal trainer to help you, or find someone reputable online to give you feedback. Something which isn't talked about frequently is the role resistance training has on balance and coordination. When you do resistance training, you're making your body move in ways that you might not necessarily do otherwise. You're working on your core muscles. You're working on muscles in your legs and on your feet, which help to increase your stability and your balance. And if we relate this to longevity, then as you get older, that's going to reduce your risk of falling because you're going to be stronger and you're going to have improved your proprioception. This is so important and people overlook it. I love the big compound movements like squats and deadlifts, and then also include more nuanced movements like Bulgarian split squats. These work on so many different muscles as well as your stability and balance, and I think they're fantastic to include. Your bone health is just so important to staying fit and healthy as you get older, and your diet can also contribute to this. Vitamin D and calcium are integral to bone health, which means you need to ensure you have enough of those in your diet. The current advice here in the UK is to supplement 10 micrograms or 400 international units of vitamin D in the darker months. I would definitely encourage people to follow this, and I would also say there's no harm in doing it year round if you want to do that too. So as well as vitamin D, you need calcium, and dairy sources are great for that. But if you don't eat dairy or you want some other food sources, then tofu can be fantastic for calcium as it's often set in a calcium-based binding. And then you have leafy greens as well as fortified foods like milk and bread. Typically, if you include those things in your diet, then you should be doing pretty well from a calcium side of things. But if, for example, you don't have dairy, then you might need to look at this in a bit more detail. If you're looking to try the vegetarian diet and you're not sure where to start, then we've got you covered. We have free meal plans available on our website for whatever your goal, whether that's weight loss, muscle gain and toning, or just generally healthy living. Head to hurrythefoodup.com/try. That's TRY to check them out and download your free plan and get started. One of the things I love about exercise is the positive mental benefits. Now, this is obviously purely anecdotal, but I feel amazing when I exercise. I love getting out in the morning for a run. I love riding my bike. And I love going to the gym too. I feel invigorated. I feel strong. And when I exercise in the morning, I feel ready for the day. And it seems like I'm not the only one who feels like this. There is a systematic review in 2023 by Singh and colleagues, which showed that exercise was beneficial for reducing the symptoms of anxiety, depression, and psychological distress. And I think that this is wonderful. I work in general practice or family medicine, and it can be difficult to explain the benefits of exercise to patients. And there's often a really big barrier. Now, there's a lot to go into here because motivation is a very personal thing. But what I love is that there is real evidence to show the benefits of exercise when it comes to your mental health. My experience is that actually it's most important to get people doing the right exercise, so exercise that they enjoy, because they're way more likely to stick to it over the long term if that's the case. Now, that's a slight tangent and again a whole different topic that we could go down, but I think choosing the right exercise and being able to sustain it over the long term is super important. Now, as if all of that wasn't enough, it seems that resistance training can help with improving cognitive function as we age, or at least maintaining it. In 2018, Gomez-Osman and colleagues found that exercise was associated with improved cognitive performance in older adults, and that's those with and without cognitive impairment. This included aerobic training, mind-body exercises, and resistance or strength training, or a combination of these three things. I find it so fascinating that exercise can have such a significant positive impact on our brain, but it's one of the reasons why it's so important to do throughout our whole life as well as we get older. So now you know how resistance training can help with maintaining muscle, how it can improve your bone health and also your mental health. But another area that it can improve is your heart health. Did you know that the leading cause of death in the USA is heart disease? So to me, it seems sensible to look after your heart. We know that resistance training can improve your heart health via two mechanisms. The first is that regular training can increase the levels of HDL cholesterol, otherwise known as the good cholesterol, and then either maintain or reduce levels of LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol. We know that a poor HDL to LDL ratio is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular events. So by improving this number, you can improve your heart health. Secondly, resistance training increases insulin sensitivity, which reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes. Both of these things contribute to lowering your risk of cardiovascular disease. So it's another way that resistance training can help with longevity, because you're going to reduce the risk of those diseases as you get older. Personally, I think resistance training should be used alongside classic cardio exercise, because combined they are even more powerful. My hope from this episode is that you've learned just how incredible resistance training can be for you and how it can help you to live longer in better health. If you did find this useful, then I would really appreciate it if you gave this a 5-star review. It won't take a moment and it will help the podcast spread to more people to help vegetarians stay healthier and happier as they get older.